Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics Podcast. I'm Jen Stone. I'm a principal security analyst here at SecurityMetrics. And today I have with me someone who was with us in our last season, Dutch Schwartz. Dutch, welcome. I just wanted to say, I don't know if you knew, we got an award for last season.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And so I'm just saying that a portion of that is because you're fantastic. And I'm going to actually read out your bio here because you've got so much cool stuff going on. Dutch is the cloud security strategist at Amazon Web Services. And let me just read this so I don't get it wrong. Dutch Schwartz has more than 25 years of experience in technology, from security startups to several of the world's largest companies. Having worked with more than 50 CISOs of Fortune 500 companies to collaborate on cybersecurity solutions, Dutch understands the evolution of CISO responsibilities and the challenges which security teams face in the cloud. A sought-after speaker, he acts as a panelist on security topics and is a frequent guest on CISO podcasts. And this one, Dutch holds a Master's of Business Administration in Global Management, certificates from MIT Sloan Management, and Harvard on cybersecurity, and was a strategy and planning officer in the U.S. Army, which is very cool. He melds his formal training with his practical experience in cybersecurity to develop cloud security strategies for customers in Amazon Web Services. What did I miss that you wanted to talk about you?
No, that was great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, everybody sort of hates the bios, right? Because you like it's a piece of the puzzle, and you're sort of like, oh gosh, you it's hard not to feel slightly arrogant and off when people read your bio. By the way.
I know,
but that's what it is.
But you know, if we're going to talk about something, it helps to kind of frame context around who are you? Where do you go? Why are you even talking about this nonsense with me? Not that cybersecurity or your bio are nonsense. I just realized what I said.
No. That's fine.
Some days I wonder. Okay. Super excited to have you here because I've been wanting to do this particular topic for some time, and it's a topic that all of us can relate to. It's a topic all of us understand. It's a topic that all of us probably have good commentary that we could bring to this conversation, and yet finding one person to sit down and really dive deep into the topic has proved challenging. And so our topic today is communication in cybersecurity, not just within the team itself, but from team to team internally, and then also externally. So communicating, speaking to cybersecurity, this is not an easy this is not an easy task that we have to take on board.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't want to sort of over rotate and say it's incredibly difficult. I think to be maybe the clearer description is, it's not something that everybody's really trained in. And so when you lack that, so then you lack the context, you sort of that starts to build on what makes it challenging. So I don't think that the things that we're going to talk about today are very standard things that a psychologist or social scientist, everybody, and they'll just resonate because they'll match like your personal experience in your personal life. Right. Sometimes we forget to sort of bring those things correctly, or appropriately into like work conversations. At the end of the day, if you and I are peers, at a company, our business relationship is a relationship. It's like every other human relationship, right? And so there's a sort of a magic, kind of a flow that you get into where on the one hand, you don't want to be so abstract, it's only work, and it's become sort of dry and it's not engaging. And on the other hand, you don't want the TMI oversharing, that could, I guess, be on the other end of the spectrum. But at the end of the day, it's still people connecting with people. So really the things I'm sure talk about today will be things that everybody will go, oh, yeah, you know what? I know that in my personal relationship, or I know that with, something I do outside of work. And so that's what I would suggest to people is bring those experiences, around communication. But yeah, I think the real lack there is we don't talk about a lot. And I know you've had Naomi on. I've been on with Naomi Buckwalter before. Yeah. She and I talked about it one time, sort of after a podcast, and she expressed sort of, gosh, I wish we had all of these things. All of those things included communication training. And I said, well, it's out there. It exists. It's just that our particular domain hasn't been really I'm not sure why, but we haven't been really pushing it. Just in the last couple of years, right? People really recognize
Right.
that's really critical to your success. And certainly, when I talk with my peers and my team members, that's part of my point of view, right? Is that what will likely make you successful is the emotional intelligence stuff. It's
Right.
the leadership skills, is the communication skills that will differentiate us, right? If we're both great and we get hired to do Python, it's probably not my skill versus your skill that will ultimately really make a difference. What's going to make a difference is all of these other things like communication.
Right. And as I was prepping for this conversation with you and the topic itself, it made me remember the reputation that IT specifically and cybersecurity as a subset of IT has had. It kind of harks back to the late 1990s, early 2000s. Do you remember the guy on Saturday Night Live? His name was Nick Burns, your IT computer guy.
Yes.
And he was, he'd sit down and move and then, be very rude about whatever it was and be belittling and make people feel bad about themselves. And then he'd say things like, you're welcome. And it was funny because it was true.
Right. Yeah, there's always a kernel, right? Or else it doesn't resonate with people, right? So there has to be some truth to that. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, again, we could delve into the history, try to sort out why it happened the way it happened, but it doesn't really matter today. What matters today is there is kind of a history of that's still sort of latent, out there. And it's really probably because security specifically did come out of the IT function, right? And so, often it came from, Jen raising her hand and saying, "Oh, I'll do that. I'll be the one who does that." And either it was because you had an interest, and like, "Oh gosh, I did some hacking and that was really cool," or whatever that got you interested, or you just sort of proactively
We don't
thought,
call it hacking. We just call it, hey, I needed a resource that I couldn't get to. That's all that was.
Well, I'm a Chris Roberts fan, so I use hacking the way he uses it, which is actually positive. Right? It's a positive term.
For sure.
But whatever it is that got you interested. So the reality is that it was very informal, right? 20, 15, even really a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
So then because of that, when you have less defined career paths, when there's less obvious, like, oh, there's path A, B, and C, and here's how you could get into those, then people make their way in. The challenge sometimes with that is when you're sort of I don't want to sound grandiose, but a self-made person, right? Because you just sort of built your own career, it's hard then not to think, oh, well, this is the path.
Right.
We're like the Mandalorian. This is the way, right? You have to do it. You have to do it. This is how I came up. And it's totally valid how Jen came up or how Dutch came up or how, Cynthia came up. Those are all totally valid and you shouldn't throw those out. But also it may not be from a from a coaching training standpoint, useful, to people in a more general sense, right? So communication skills is one of those that people arguably probably rose, whatever that means in your organization, to be, to either from a formal, team leading and honor function, or just became well known because they innately had good communication skills or they invested in those. But I think the broader message that we're talking about here is, it's critical to everybody, right? You have to be able to do that, or the days of just being, sort of the smartest, person on XYZ topic, the utility of that isn't really high.
You can't scale it.
So if I can't teach it to somebody else, if I can't hand that over when I move on to the next thing, then the utility is really low, right? And so that's where you have to think of. Training, coaching, scaling, bringing more people in, all the things that we sometimes, complain about as more generally in the industry, those are all coachable moments, right? So we have to stop and say, well, how do I help other people get better at communicating, and myself, how do you get better at communication skills? Because it's really critical.
And to your point, historically, with the, teaching it to yourself or figuring it out as you went along, that was a very different mindset than what we have now, which is we do have ways of learning how other people have learned. We do have ways of gaining that knowledge that are more step by step and prescriptive. So it's not like, and so I think that there's there are reasons that the mindset kind of existed in the past, but that's the past and this is now. And so now
Right.
we look at where are we now and how do we then, regardless of what maybe the reputation was, regardless of what communication lack of techniques were in the past, we are now in a situation where we can definitely learn from each other and have a positive way of doing it going forward. I had an interesting moment with a colleague the other day where he and I were having a private conversation, and I said something about I personally work to bring my best self to every single conversation because I know that I have been guilty in the past of being short with people, being impatient, being dismissive, being the things that are not positive and supportive in communication. And so now everything I do is what can I do to support whatever's going on right now in this conversation, in this group, in this dynamic, and bring that person. And he said, "Oh, I just thought you were kind of being brown nosing." And I just thought, oh no.
That's interesting.
So did I take it too far, or was his, kind of older guy, maybe his perception of how we're supposed to be in this position was a little something different? And frankly, he is kind of grumpy a lot, but we all have kind of our own baseline, right? And so
Sure.
so actively looking at what is my responsibility in this moment of conversation, and how can I make it comfortable enough for all of us to be heard, and then find the best way forward together. So that's kind of how I approach it. But it was an interesting kind of gut check on it.
Yeah. Well, but so one of the points there is right is the transparency, right? So by having the conversation with somebody else, you can say, "Hey, I've been thinking about XYZ a lot," and maybe in this case, it's communication skills or empathy or connect with.
Right.
Tell other people that, because then they understand and it can at least appreciate where you're coming from.
Sure.
That doesn't have. So that's one of the things that you need to do is consciously talk. You think about it and then talk about it with other people and say, "Hey, I've made a choice." So I'll give you a simple example. Like on my team, I happen to be the original person on my team. So which 0% makes me special, but I am the original person on the team. So I'm aware that as the team is built out, I have to in larger group settings, I on purpose will make an effort to make sure that other people get an opportunity. I'm not always successful, right? But I also went to some of my peers and said, "Hey, like in this year, I'm really focusing on that. So if you don't hear me speaking up, it's not because I'm not listening to you. I don't think the idea is worthy of a good, genuine debate. It's because we have newer people on the team, and so they could easily be overshadowed." Unintentionally, right? So some of that transparency, letting the other person know, "Hey, I'm consciously doing this," right? Even when you meet them, like, I want to understand what your group does. And a lot of the things that we talk about in communication it's unintentional. Let's just, say it that way, right? Because if whatever you do all of the time, you just presume that it's really obvious why you're doing the things, and there's 3 choices and you made choice B, and here's why, because it's just part of what you do, but it's not obvious to everybody else. And so it behooves you to have that conversation, right? And to show the empathy and understand what they're doing. So what happens sometimes is we get really focused on the tangible tactical thing, and we don't say, "Why do you guys do it the way you do it? Help me understand that."
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful statement, because it gets them to start to talk, and it gets them to say, "Oh, well, here's why we do the thing. This is the way we approach it." And hopefully you're learning and they understand that you're listening at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting to why in a conversation setting, it just brings so much value to the conversation, because if you're communicating something, but the reason that the two of you are talking is to reach a separate outcome, then not being aligned on why means the conversation is going to be even more difficult than it would otherwise have to be. So let's look at a specific. Sometimes in cybersecurity, we sometimes feel like the department of no. Like, no,
Sure.
You can't do that. No, you have to. No, you have to do this. So sometimes those conversations one-on-one become ego-driven because one person's saying no and the other person's saying, no, you can't make me. And so instead of the conversation being about, well, why is the no there? Why are we even talking about this specific thing that needs to be implemented? It becomes a power struggle of one person saying no and the other person saying, you can't make me, right? So how do you get past being the department of no?
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces there you sort of have to unpack, right? So one of it is the backdrop to it, right? So this is one of those times where you do have to say, well, why did we get to that point? Why are we in that position, right? And so it's arguably because security teams are there to protect things, right? And so that's intrinsically the way that a security team sees the world. And so much of that is pruning things or saying no to things. And that's sort of natural to the way that you would look at a problem. The more sort of forward-looking framing today is it's not the security team's job to make that choice. It's the security team's job to understand why the business wants to go that direction, and then to genuinely, authentically, argue on the other side if that's how what your experience tells you. But ultimately, it's the business's decision to make, right? And so when I hear, CISOs or security leaders say, well, I'm not in the business of saying no, right? That message has to get to everybody, right? That, well, on a tactical level, we might say no, but then right behind it say, well, that's not the way that we would suggest doing it. Why do you need to do it that way, Jen? Help me understand. Because a lot of times it's what I would consider mistakes of effort, right? You're trying to do a thing and do your job. So I'll take something simple, right? I want to use recording software, like OBS, like we were talking about when we jumped on, right? And so we have a company policy. We have a set number of tools that we use for obvious reasons, like any company. We're trying to control those costs. Sure. And for whatever reason, we don't choose the one that you and I love the most. And so we go sort of the formal process and we get sort of the formal no. Well, then we can either live with that or we'll probably try to find a workaround, which is what most employees do, because you and I have decided it's really the best choice, right? So that's why I mean it's a mistake of effort. Like we're trying to do this. What we don't know if we're not, aware of security implications is there's probably some risk there. That's why the security team, has said no to that. Or so then there's got to be enough of a relationship that the other human knows somebody to go to.
Right.
Because if you just get the formal no, whether that's through, a piece of software or whatever your process is, that's unfulfilling to the other person, right? But it's on the security team as well to establish a rapport and a culture that says, well, tell me why you guys need that. Help me understand, Jen. Why do you think you need that one versus the other one? And then you might give me the really good business case. Well, because it has this feature that we really need to do this thing, and the choice you're giving me doesn't have that. Well, that's a very different conversation. Now, I may still respond with, there's some inherent concerns that we have from a security standpoint to be able to deploy that to all the employees or whatever their concern is. But now we're having a very different conversation, right? It's a task discussion, right? So when you look at sort of conflict management, there's sort of within the workplace, you have sort of task conflicts, we have relationship conflicts, and then we have sort of hierarchical conflicts, right? Where, to your point, right, I think I have some influence or power and you disagree with the scope of that influence or power, right? If you can get it down to a task discussion, then it takes sort of the heat out of it. It takes the emotion out of it. And you can talk about the thing. Well, and so let me go back to the communication piece. If I understand why, that helps ground me, right? If we don't have a discussion about why, then either party has to make assumptions and then has to draw conclusions. Right. So if you've ever seen the ladder of inference, right? You start with, I have a piece of data, then I make an assumption, right? Then I build a conclusion, then I build a belief, and then I take an action, right? That's really wordy, but that's how it happens really quickly. So if you and I are on peer teams and, we have some kind of output that we're all expected to do, and I've asked your team to do it twice and they haven't done it, well, that's the data point. Now I start making assumptions. Well, Jen doesn't think it's important, right? Because I mean, it's just a normal, natural human reaction.
That's how humans go.
Jen must not think it's important, right? Well, then what happens? Well, I go up the inference ladder and I go, well, Jen just doesn't get it. Her team doesn't understand, right? And then I build a belief based on that, right? Well, Jen is not, she just doesn't get it,
Right.
and then I do an action based on that belief, right? Now I'm going to presuppose that the next thing, Jen's not going to be supportive. She's not going to be behind it. And see how we've gone up this really tricky ladder, right? Built on these really tenuous things, and it's understandable. So again, both teams or both parties have to kind of nip that down here and say, hey, first of all, ideally, I would say, hey, Jen, like I have a deliverable for our joint boss, and the last 2 times, like your team like didn't get it done, on Friday, like was expected. Can you help me understand? And then you might be like, I had a competing outcome that actually Susan also told me was, and I didn't realize. So you guys, get back down to the facts.
Right.
Like help me understand why, or it might be just a misunderstanding, right? You might be like, oh, I didn't realize. I didn't catch that Slack message. I didn't see that, but if without that starting at that base level, then you go, oh, okay, cool. And then again, it takes all the emotion out of it.
Right.
Okay. Hey, so then I got another one coming up next Tuesday. I really can you get behind me and support me on this one, right? And so that's where you got to get to the why. I got to understand where you're coming from, why you're doing that. And we can disagree. It's totally fine, right? We may have that struggle where like, well, we legitimately have 2 competing outcomes that we're trying to get to. One is creativity and agility and flexibility, and the other is security, right? It's the nature of our team's roles that there's always going to be trade-offs.
Sure.
Right? There's almost never it's A or B. That's it, right? I mean, it's really, really rare, right? So it's all about that. So to knowing that, you've got to lean into that then and say, I got to get comfortable with the ambiguity. I've got to ask questions, right? And vice versa. That's like coming to me, hey, I want to explain to you why my team thinks about it this way. And you've got to do that because then again, like I said, you can hopefully step down from a relationship struggle to a hierarchy down to, oh, it's a task thing. We're trying to talk about this thing,
And I find that in the work that I do in third party assessments, at the task level, it is, we're trying to make sure that you have security holes taken care of. You've got a security stance that is sufficient for the purposes of whatever you undertook this assessment. So sometimes let's say it's PCI. Let's say you've got credit card data. Let's say we're trying to get that security. Well, I know that one technique is, as an auditor, go in and only point out the negative things. This fails. This is bad. This is not secure enough, without any real interaction with why do you do it this way, and what other potential things do you have in place to mitigate that risk, and is there another way that we could go about doing this? For example, storing credit card data used to be something everybody did, just because it's what they did, right?
Right.
And so going in and saying, all right, you can't pass because you don't have right key management. You don't have these your DMZ set up so that your internal system is segregated away from that. You don't have, so all of these things that you have to do to keep credit card safe. You can go in and just beat someone up over that, or you can say, hey, here are the things that I have found that are going to make so that you don't align with the standard, which means we can't get you compliant against that standard at this time. So what do you want to do about it? And it becomes more of and you can do this whether you're internal or external, doesn't matter. The thing is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the security level we're trying to meet? And in what way are we violating that? And then it's not my decision how you solve that problem.
Right.
It's not even my decision whether you solve that problem. Right? So there are companies that have decided to be not compliant with PCI and pay fines while they sort out what they're going to do. And then there are others who have been like, look, we're going to revamp this because we don't want this potential issue. We're going to completely revamp it, or we're going to lock it down in certain ways, or we're going to have a third party take care of things. Like, there are so many ways to resolve security challenges and to architect a solution to whatever you're making. But if you go in as either internal or external, the person who's doing the security, if you go in there and only point out the negatives, we already as humans really take negatives on board a lot more than we take on positives. So the way I like to approach it is I will point out as many positive things as I can while I'm working with people. Hey, you've got your logs down. This is great. I'm super happy to see this. You have all of your people not only took their training, but also signed this form that said that they took it. You've got the extra bits here, pointing out the awesome things that groups are doing. It means when you get to the conversation about the negative thing, it's a less fraught conversation, because you're not there just to beat people up, but you're there almost as if you were on the same team working on the same problem.
Yeah, and so let's just take that whole thread there. So, and why are we using somebody with your talents and your skills and your experience, right? So if we frame that as Jen has seen a ton of different environments and has expertise that will help us, that's a totally different framing than Jen is here so we can check these blocks or not these blocks.
Right.
That's a totally different way that people internalize it. So now we're back to kind of why has, it's like tiramisu has layers, right? So now we're back to like intrinsically, why are we doing an assessment? Well, overtly, sure, like there's been a choice that we want to be compliant, or we're required to be compliant. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's really the simple answer to the why, right? If you're going to do that anyway, why not get more value out of that?
Right.
Right. So, hey, Jen, super smart person who has a lot of experience and sees this in other environments that are not mine. How can we do this differently?
Right.
Why does the control mechanism say it that way? I don't really understand. Yeah. I mean, so we're back to like if the framing of it, because then people can internalize it completely differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a much more fun conversation to have. It's a much more fun assessment. And I see this with internal groups as well, where sometimes I'll work with groups where the internal security people are working with me and have a very negative relationship with their IT, with the people that they're supposed to be supporting as security folks. And that makes my job harder because everybody's angry already. And I can't imagine working in a situation where you're all ultimately trying to do the same thing, make this business successful, right? And so some people are trying to build things and get more features and create products, and other people are trying to get them to do it securely. And that handshake of conversation and communication about how do we do this, realizing what our actual mission is. And I think that's what some people lose track of, is what's the actual mission.
Completely agree, right? So now we're back to, we talked early on about across the teams, right? So it's not just, we're in the security team and we're talking to technology people and other engineers and devs, et cetera. That certainly happens, right? But the business of the business is the business, right? So how can you, to the maximum, enable a business if you don't understand it? Right. And I'm not being flippant, right? And so again, I'm not saying, you hired, Dutch on day one and I don't have a ton of experience, and it's natural for me to then focus on the tasks that you've given me, right? Because of my experience level and because of the tenure that I have. But as you, whether or not you have a formal leadership role or not, as you get more tenure and as you can provide more value, you should be able to explain to somebody, well, here's how my company competes. Right. And you need to be able to explain things in a way that communicates it to them that they think that you get each other. In other words, I struggle when I hear, absolute metrics, right? So absolute metrics are, yesterday we stopped 32,715 DDoS attacks. Okay. Yeah. Is that awesome? Is that
what does that
relative
even mean?
To anything? What does that even mean? Also, that only means something to somebody who understands that terminology, right? It's not that it doesn't matter. It only matters like in a narrow context. Right. So, as a leader, you have to be able to communicate, hey, what are we oriented on? Okay. Are we, and ultimately it's dollars, it's percentages, it's financial terminology that goes across, the teams, because that's what the business orients on. And so you have to have that taxonomy. So as a security team in a leadership position, you need to understand that, right? So if your particular company's return on working capital, as an example, then you need to understand what return on working capital is. Again, at least at a work person's working level of what that means, right? Well, gosh, that means there's 5 levers to that, and here's all the levers, And so you can't sort of only come from the, here's what the attack matrices they say, or here's what the vulns say. That's our terminology. That's what we talk about internally, but that can't be the communication you have with the vice president of sales and marketing in Europe. Because there's nothing really meaningful that's happening in that then, right? And if you don't know that, that's okay. Then we need to go start asking those questions.
Sure.
Hey, help me understand, what it is, help me understand why we do marketing the way we do it. Help me understand why we do development this way. Help me understand. You just ask those questions because people love answering those, right? And you're going to learn genuinely about how they approach things, right? And I don't know where the quarter drops and where that fits into then the future conversation. But if you don't have that, then what are you left with? You're only left with the tech stack to talk about, right? And that's not moving the business forward.
Exactly. And it also affects your ability to do your job. So one of the in almost every report that I write, there is a section that says, what does this business do? What is the business of this business? And so having to write that down, that is one of the most difficult things for me to get in certain organizations where IT and security are kind of separated from that knowledge. And the problem with that is if you don't know what your business does, how do you know what's important? How do you prioritize the security work that you're doing in an organization if you don't know what the business if you don't know what the company that you work for does, how do you then frame your work properly within it?
So Jen, why do you think that is? Why do you think that happens?
I think it a lot of it is when we talk about communication between IT or security and the business, it's hard for those of us in technology to admit we don't know something because we know a lot of things, right? We know a lot of things that are hard, and we know a lot of things that maybe we've taught ourselves. So kind of getting back again to a little bit of the ego question, right? And so we have all this knowledge and we want to apply this knowledge, but maybe we don't always see the value in knowing the business or understanding the business. And there might be some fear also in asking the business what they do, because then, then there is, you have to admit you don't know. I just remembered a specific example of this happening to me.
Great.
So remember back when Sarbanes-Oxley was first a thing. That first came in, right?
Absolutely.
And so I was sitting across the table from a guy from Ernst & Young, and he says, this is my first Sarbanes-Oxley audit or SOX audit.
SOX, yeah.
I am not sure what to ask you because I am a CPA. And I said, okay, well, what is it? What is it you need to know? What are you trying to solve? And he used some words that I did not know. They were words that you would find on a balance sheet, right?
Sure.
And so when he left, I thought, I don't think I was helpful at all. And I didn't know. And then I remember that feeling when I sucked it up. And fortunately, I had an open door to the CFO's office. And he was always willing to talk to me. I went in and I said, I think I need to understand what a balance sheet is and why it matters, because otherwise, how am I going to know how the IT part affects that? And he walked through it with me, and I don't remember the words now, but what each of the different lines were in terms of financials and things and how it affected the business. But it was not easy, and it took taking a breath and going, there's something I don't know, and I have to go admit that I don't know something. And so I think from a tech person's point of view, there is that, I know all this thing. What do I need to know your part? I just do my job. So maybe there's a little bit of a siloing thing too. What do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think those certainly could be in play. I think that the levers, though, that we can use are culture and leadership, right? So if you have a culture, right, and so in this case, you had a one-on-one relationship, but if you have a culture that's okay to say, I don't really understand what that means, or, or ask more questions. If you have a culture that isn't, sort of zero sum and allows you to ask questions, that's really helpful. And then on kind of a more personal level, it comes down to leadership, right? So then as we move on in our careers in security, then frankly, the onus is on us, right?
Yeah.
To communicate that, right? So I'll give you an example from a totally, kind of a different field. I managed the storage for a company. And so I had a portion of my team was like, we would call them today sort of inventory managers or analysts, really. And they managed inventory. And so they had what we would call, financial fiduciary responsibility to manage, like $300 million of inventory. And they took that very seriously. And they had lots of sort of quantity type stuff we talked about, inventory turns and
Right.
so on and so forth. And again, at our team, that really all made sense. But I was brought in along with some other folks from other teams who had more of a broader business perspective. And in the first week or two, I just sort of, watched the team interact. And they were just saying no a lot. And I just hear one end of a conversation where they're like, no, you can't have this, literally, and then hang up. And then I'd be like, let's go to the conference. Can you help me understand what was the interaction there? And they were basically saying, to person A, you can have this inventory because inventory would be embedded into a product, and then no to another person. And I'm like, okay, why did you say no? Help me understand. Like, I don't think I understand. Well, I said no because of ABC reason. Okay. I didn't hear you explain that to the other person on the other end of the phone. Like, I just heard you say, no, you can't have it, and hang up, right? And so then I was sort of looking for a way, like, how do I explain this? And so they, again, felt very passionate. Like, well, it was because person A was, air quotes, the project was bigger or more important. Or, they had some rationale in their mind. But I'm like, well, A, you didn't explain that to person B. And then also, I'm not sure that rationale that you're using encompasses actually the entire business. So fortunately, the company I worked at used return on working capital. And they actually had a formula that we used. So if we had a whiteboard, I always love it. I would draw it out for you, right? So, we had a formula that we used. And the benefit of that was all managers, regardless if you were in legal, HR, finance, sales, everybody understood what that term meant. Okay. So then I went into a room a few weeks later and said, okay, here's what return on working capital. I know you think it's a marketing term. We actually use a modified DuPont formula. This is the formula. And guess what? I know you were concerned about inventory turns. That's one of the metrics. Guess what? All the other, and I showed them, hey, here's all the other levers that you can pull. So I don't know that the recommendation you made was good or bad. I'm not sure. But what I do know is, the second person didn't learn anything, and then nor did you.
Yeah.
So now we're going to have a different conversation, which is, hey, Jen, help me understand what the project is that you're working on and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, hey, when I look at return on working capital, I'm looking at inventory turns, I'm looking at accounts pay, and then explain your point of view. And then you can have even if you end up still saying no, you've learned something, they've learned something, and now you've made arguably a qualitatively better choice, right? So it's incumbent on us, that's a totally different field, but it's incumbent on us to have the same kind of conversations, right? Why is the business doing these 3 major initiatives this year, right? How do I need to support those? Why are those things important? And you can just kind of keep tearing that why down until we get back to that tactical, like, what's the task in front of us, right? But there has to be a backdrop. Why are we trying to do this? Because maybe this year we are trying to really move very, very fast because there's forces upon it, in the industry, or for whatever reason, the board and the executive leadership team has decided that. Well, if that's how we're oriented, then we know we're going to have to trade off and take more risks than on a whiteboard we'd want to. That's okay, because that's why, right? So you have to get to that and say, help me understand. And again, I use return on working capital, but it could be net present value, it could be ROI, it could be ROIC. There's a host of terms, right? But the point is, you need to know what those are.
Right.
And you need to be able to talk to the business, because now you have a common language. If we don't have a common language, then I'm talking and telling you how many DDoS attacks we mitigated yesterday, and you're trying to tell me about, velocity, then we're not really conversing.
Right.
We're not really communicating about anything. And so we both probably walk away and go, we probably roll our eyes, and, and even if we have a good rapport personally, we probably walk away saying, the other person just doesn't get it.
Yeah.
They don't get it, and that's at the heart of most disagreements, right? We're back to just, most disagreements are around the two parties feel like the other party just doesn't get it.
Well, because not only are you not using the same language, but you also are not deciding things based on the same end goals. right? The same
Yes.
the same metrics, the same. So I liked the example that you gave, that there's actual formulas, or there is a risk stance that is set by senior leadership. And so
Sure.
if you're trying to make decisions, but you're making decisions based on maybe where you worked before, or what your best knowledge is, or your own personal risk tolerance, then if something goes wrong, or if you have to say no, what do you have to fall back on? You don't have the structure of the business to fall back on, and you want that. Right. So as an individual functioning within a business, what you want to say is, I understand the business, what we're trying to accomplish. I understand the risk stance. I understand how we make decisions of this company well enough to fit what I do within that framework.
Yeah, and so there's sort of plays out in different ways where you are and where that conversation is, right? And so if you're at the CISO senior level, it may be hey, so Jen, I understand you want to buy XYZ software because you think it's critical to your division success. We go back and forth. I explain sort of, hey, here's my informed viewpoint on why this isn't the greatest choice. Here's where we would accept some risk. And then ultimately maybe that's okay, so Jen, I'm transferring that risk over to you. Like, you're going to have to accept that risk, right? And so that's a technique. Again, at that level, if you're structured that way, other people do it through their software mechanisms. They may have sort of a sign-off process. But again, it still happens at each of those levels, right? It may just be, hey, let me help you understand why I'm concerned about that.
Yeah.
And that in of itself might be enough for you to go, gosh, I didn't have any idea. It's a mistake. I'm only looking at my piece of this. I really need to move fast. And and my team already knows the software, and that's why I want to deploy it. And they won't, of course, know your point of view. So you've got to take that extra step and say, hey, here's why. This is why I think about it this way. And again, if we have some common text, not just like you said, not even taxonomy, but some kind of framework or some kind of risk that we lean towards, then we can go, okay, not my favorite. Like, I wouldn't, do it necessarily, but I see your point, and this is what we're going to go with.
Right. And then I think you were just inferring, recognizing who gets to make that decision. So
yes.
I'm often pulled into the question of who is responsible for breach. And my answer is always senior leadership is responsible for every outcome in their organization, right? So, but how can they be responsible for that if you refuse to let them make the decisions, or you refuse to take the decisions that they've made and then implement them in a way that is going to be supportive of that decision, right? So,
that's great. That's a great insight, because you've broken the whole chain of the process, right? I mean, so you've on the one hand, you're like, no, I want to be able to say yes or no to a thing. And on the other turn, you're like, oh no, but when inevitably there's a challenge, I want to say, well, but they didn't listen to me. Right. You don't get to, again, that's Alan Offer jokingly calls this the blame thrower, right? Where the blame thrower starts to come out and people start to argue about that. And it's totally not useful. It's certainly not useful one-on-one. And again, if that relationship conflict will inevitably flare up, but also if you're in a leadership, it's not useful to anybody else, right? Because then your team sees that, right? And it's just the wrong orientation.
Yeah.
So you have to start from a different starting point.
Absolutely.
We're here to support you. I'm here to inform you. I may have to vigorously inform you sometimes and really push hard, because that's that's my part of the responsibility, Chase, to really push hard and say, no, this is why, but I think this risk is, maybe I think the risk is bigger than you do. And I have to explain why that is and help you understand that. And then we got to walk away and then come back and go, okay, but ultimately that's your choice, Jen.
Right.
Now I'm in the position of, okay, now knowing that that's the choice, and we're aligned on that to the objective. Now, how do I mitigate that to the best of our ability?
Right.
How do I reduce that risk surface, reduce the likelihood of that risk happening, or if there's something unfortunate to happen, how do we then quickly resolve that? Those are much more useful things, right? To say, well, that's the choice. We're going to support that choice because it's what the business needs. Now, day to day, how do we mitigate that? And then if there were to be an instance, how do we manage it when it happens?
Right.
That's a way better exercise, right? Than being huffy and be like, well, I can't believe they did that.
How could they not listen to me?
Relations. That doesn't help me. It doesn't help you. Everybody walks away unfulfilled with that, right?
Right. Exactly.
But we've got to get beyond our own frame of view and understand theirs. Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. If you were to give people, one really solid piece of advice on improving communication from where they are right now, what would you have them start with? What would you have them focus on? How would you have them improve that?
I think two things. One is just outlook. So as you go through your day, sort of jokingly in your head, think, what if Jen is? I'm going to assume Jen is really smart but uninformed on this topic. I just presume I have charitable assumptions. I just assume you're well intentioned. You're trying to do a great job. You're here at the same place as me, so we share values. Start with that, and then go. But you just don't know anything about this, right? It's just start with that framing. So that's sort of an outlook thing. And then in terms of like internally, get to your own why and understand why you like to do the things that you do, and what does that mean about how you make choices so that you can communicate that to other people? Hey, these things are really important to me. This is why, as I look at the resources that I have, these are how I think about these choices. And then if you're in a leadership position, you need to communicate that to the people that you have care of.
Yeah.
And then you communicate that to the rest of the business, because then people can connect with you and understand. And then again, it's not about agreement. People sort of over-rotate sometimes, like, we're going to agree to disagree. Social psychologists would say that's not helpful.
No.
Right? We don't have to agree to disagree. I need to understand, well, why are we disagreeing? Mm-hmm. And if I understand why we're disagreeing, and we can professionally disagree, and that's okay. And we can walk away, right? But if we just disagree, it's sort of a flippant, like, it's intractable, it's unsolvable. That doesn't help anyone.
And it's pretty dismissive of the other person's viewpoint.
Super dismissive, yeah. It's like, for all of the reasons, right? And it's the eye roll and the crossed arms, and you start, and it just sure. it helps nothing. So I would just frame the interactions differently as you go through your day, and then think about why do I think this thing, and if you can help expose that, because again, we do lots of heuristic choices every day, all day long, because there's so many things that we have to decide. But if you pause and think about that, then you can explain that to other people, and they might go, oh, that's really cool, Jen, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Or
perfect.
I don't know that I agree, but now at least I understand where you're coming from.
And I liked what you said about assuming good intent in the other person.
Charitable assumptions. Because doing anything else is fraught with danger.
Yeah.
Right. It's so easy to make mistakes if you do that. Right.
Yeah.
So and when something happens, like you said, a fact pops up. Jen, your team, wasn't behind, wasn't on time in the last two things. Don't start with, right. Don't go right up to, I make assumptions. Now I'm going to infer why I think you did. None of that's helpful. Hey, can you help me understand what was up?
Yeah. And
then give you a chance to tell me, what was going on. Then we're back down to here, and we can communicate.
Yeah. I find that if you're relitigating old interactions every time before starting a new conversation, then those things are not really resolved. And so so those things need to be resolved. If they keep coming up, then get them resolved, because you need to be in a positive place to deal with disagreement. Disagreement it's uncomfortable for so many of us, and yet in our work life we have to disagree in order to help others find the best and ourselves find the best outcomes.
Completely agree with you.
Yeah. Well, it's always fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much, Dutch, for coming on the show. We'll have some links in the show notes on how people can connect with you. And is there anything exciting on your horizon that you want to let people know about?
No, I'm just excited. I think, like everybody, the change is forthcoming. We're starting to look at events and activities, and I know lots of people are just happy to, hey, can we go grab lunch?
Yes.
So where everybody's sort of figuring out where the comfort level is and traveling and all those things. But I think we're coming to a point where it's almost summertime. Kids are going to be out of school. Mm-hmm. I think it's just going to be, we're sort of putting a lot of the challenging, year and a half behind us. So I'm just excited about that.
Ah, that's great to hear. All right. Well, you take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics Podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.